So I want to welcome us. I'm Linda Hayward. I'm chairman of the board of this wonderful library, and I welcome you all this evening. Before I get Jerry started, I just want to say the next program coming is really different. It's about beer hiking. Okay, that was books arriving. Yes. This is about how you can hike around New England, going to different breweries and trying different beers.
There's a book about it.
Yeah,
I read a review.
And he's going to come and talk about it. So anyway, if you're into beer and hiking, or either one, I guess, that should be a good program. And that's on June 6th. So we hope to see some of you there. Now, Jerry Miller, in a way, I don't feel like I need to introduce him because anyone who's up here and reads the local paper keeps seeing those announcements of the auctions. But he has a good history of doing this kind of work. I've got some notes here. He's a member of the Certified Appraisers Guild of America and the Maine Auctioneers Association. I don't know what you have to do to get into those things, but he got in.
I'll explain that. The appraisal part.
Okay, and he was a shop manager at the GKS Bush on Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. So he got his chops down there. He came up here. He's been appraising the states and running these auctions since 1992.
92, yeah.
And
we actually did the first auction in the second floor of Harvard House.
There you go.
I learned my lesson. Don't do it on the second floor.
Don't get the furniture up in town. So, he's done everything from multi-$1,000 things to some of these little items that we have here today. So I think we should just let Jerry tell us about what he does. Jerry.
Right. Thank you. As she said, we started in 92. I've always liked antiques, but I didn't do much about them until I ended up in Washington. And GKS Bush, who was younger than me at the time, so we were both around 28 years old, opened a very fancy antique store on Pennsylvania Avenue. And we had $500,000 tables and $100,000 clocks. And it was quiet because most people didn't really want to talk to me. So a lot of the stuff came in and went out over dinner that guy had with somebody. But it all came in and we got to take it apart and find out what it was made of, find out what it was real. And there are endless antique bakes out there. But we would put a quilt down on Pennsylvania Avenue and unscrew these 17th century and 18th century tables and take them all apart to make sure that it was all the right wood for the thing and it was made out of the right materials. And it was probably the best, most useless learning I've ever had because I really don't see much of that. But it was fascinating. It was in those days, which gets right into the other part. Any research we did was done like this. And we had hundreds of books, every antiques magazine ever made, every SAC catalog. And you sat there and looked through them when these pieces came in. And inevitably, at least at that level, those things had been in catalogs in the past, whether it was in 1900 or 1920. And when you found it, it was a big, exciting day. Now you can do everything we did with books on a phone. And if anybody's interested in hundreds of books about antiques, they're available. It was competitive for years when I went to auctions and did auctions. The dealers fought to get research books because it was the only way to find out any information. Now they do it with their phones and they'll stand there at an auction taking pictures and the information comes up immediately. In the past, when we did an auction, we had what's called preview, and people would come at the crack of dawn and they would spend 4 or 5 hours looking everything over. Have you all been to auctions before? Yeah. And they'd preview for hours. And then they'd go out to their cars where they had all their books stashed in the back seat and try and look them up. They don't do that anymore. They just sort of appear, they use their phones. They don't come until half an hour before I start an auction these days, which is very nerve-wracking. Because you want more than 2 or 3 people in the room. So anyways, I worked for Bush, or for Guy, and then we left DC after we got married. I ended up out in Western Massachusetts, and I worked for a man named, well, his name is Douglas Auctioneers. We ran this big weekly sale. And I was what's called a runner, which is the people that stand there and hold up every piece of furniture in the room. And then during the week, we would drive around in his truck, and we basically packed and carried furniture. But we saw millions of things over the year or so I was there, because we did it every single week. And people from all over New England would show up. And we had getting to the point of this, we had one room where one guy did stuff which was very casual and was considered a stuff room. And then the other room was a formal auction where everybody had chairs and sat down and bid from the back. And that's what runners had to do, was bring every piece up, run it up to the front of the room and show it to people. And over time, you learn how to do it really well. And there's a trick to it. If you hold things up and you make eye contact, people will bid. And if you start going like this, they'll stop. And then you can go like this, they'll start again. My kids, actually a lot of the high school worked for me when they were younger, and I would teach them. That was what I would tell them how to do it. And you could see them playing with it. They'd be doing this, and then they'd go like this. It was great fun. And a great learning experience for them. That's basically the auction end of it. We go to people's houses, we get estates, we pack it. It's still largely packing and moving furniture, all of it over to Norumbega now, and then we set it up, and then the auction starts. And it's really a performance. There's a system to set it up so that it looks better than it does scattered around on the table. And then you're on stage. The runners and me are on stage for however long it takes, 2 hours, 4 hours, trying to keep everybody's interest level going. And we have never gone the pompous route. So it's very casual, quite funny sometimes. And we do not give people chairs. I don't know if you, we never have, well, I did for the Rockefellers. But my theory is that when you're sitting in an audience at an auction, you talk to each other and you get distracted and you're looking around and you wait for somebody way back there to bring one piece of furniture up to the front of the room. And it gets kind of slow. So I've always done it, that everybody walks around with me. Which can be, when it's a really busy sale, it can be hard to maneuver everybody around, but you're right there looking at the stuff, and then you could remember, oh, I really wanted that. Oh, I didn't see that before that. I need that. And it's faster. We generally do about 130 items an hour, which is speedy, and it's there's a debate out there about whether I do it right or not, because I have always been willing to go down to $1, even if it's going to go back up. I start where I think it should go, and it often goes back up there, but I'll wait till it gets down to $1, and then you do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then you can jump a little bit and a little bit. We had a house in Lemoyne that the night before the sale, or maybe a couple days before, she brought in a journal, a ship's journal, that she had forgotten to give me. And it was a journal of the USS Constitution that in 1878 went to Paris. It took the stuff going to the Paris exhibition of 1878 to Europe. And the midshipman who wrote the journal was a guy named Mahan, who later became the god of naval warfare writing, and ended up an admiral. And it was a surprise. Some guys saw about it. One guy on the phone somehow picked up on it. This was really before the internet. We got on the phone, it went down to $10. And we went up from $10 to $5,500 by $5 increments, because they don't like to let you jump. It can kill the sale. Some dealers will try and jump it to scare everybody off. But these guys just insisted they would not go. And so 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, up to $5,500. And the guy on the phone got it. He was happy. We arranged payment. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, there's a knock on my door. And this man is standing there, and a big burly guy named Steppenwolf behind him with leather jacket and steel-toed boots. And he panicked and thought I would sell it because he didn't think I knew what it was in the first place. And so he'd run up to make sure I didn't get rid of it before he got there. So we came in and we're sort of facing each other off, and we're taking pictures of me with it and him with it. And I realized that I knew him. And he used to be a paper guy down in Western Massachusetts. And I'd seen him buying stuff down there. So he wasted his drive, and we were all friends at the end, and they went off quite happily.
So he sort of bought it sight unseen over the phone, or was he able to see it?
No, sight unseen. It must have had it in an ad somewhere for him to hear about it, or somebody called him. But before the internet, it was very localized. The guys that I had to deal with were the local dealers, and they would buy it, and then they take it to New York and sell it at a profit, or they take it somewhere else and sell it at a profit. When the internet arrived and it got better and better, everybody in the country sees it now.
Yeah.
We advertise on a simple site called auctionzip.com for regular sales.
And do you think that improves sales?
Oh, yes. That's made a big difference. It's made a big difference. And then in for fancy sales, I go further afield and I put an ad in what's called the Newtown Bee for the Antiques and Theirs Weekly, which is a national fancy auction magazine, like Main Antique Digest, if you read that. Yes, it made a tremendous difference. And I used to, I had my one big barn find painting that did very well. The locals jumped in thinking they were going to scare everybody off at $5,000, and that was the last time they ever did. Because we had phones, some guys in Paris and some guys everywhere, and it was embarrassing for them, but it was good for me. And it was a true what everybody dreams about. I did an auction. I was cleaning up the house after the sale with my what I call a removals man, or some people call it junkman. And behind a bunch of iron beds, we found a mirror picture carton, a cardboard box. And I opened it up and we pulled it out, and he said, "Ew." And it was, I said, "No, I'm not sure that you should say ew." And I went and looked at it. It was a guy named William Henry Johnson, who was a Black American painter in the 20s up to the 50s or 60s. Did impressionistic things, mostly in France. And then he came back home and started doing more folk art kind of stuff. So I found this painting and I was thrilled, and I started advertising it. And that week of the auction, the Smithsonian had an exhibit of his work. And the US Postal Service put out a stamp with his work on it. So it got pretty good exposure.
Serendipity.
Very much so.
I have a comment.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we can, your story about now you can just pick up your phone and find out whatever they cost on.
Yeah.
In my few efforts to find out how much things are worth, I find roadblocks in having to have a subscription.
Yes.
Sign up here and we'll tell you how much that's worth. And I only get a price from eBay, like it doesn't, eBay's the only one that gives me.
There's it's called First Dibs. That's a pretty high-end spot, but they have really pretty good pricing for when you're pricing things.
First Dibs?
First Dibs, and then there's Ruby Lane.
Okay.
Those are sort of the high-end part of it. And then you do have to pay for most.
So do you have subscriptions to these things
Yeah.
to find out? Yeah,
I do.
instead of magazines and.
Yeah,
and
a lot of them are
big
free.
collection. Yeah,
There's a thing called live auctioneers that's pretty good.
okay,
They're
Okay.
free.
yeah,
Yeah,
great.
same thing.
Yeah, no, everybody does. And then the other problem you run into is that you have a piece that you see something that looks like it on any site you see, and it's $10,000, but it may not be the piece you're looking at.
Right, yeah.
Because your grandmother owned it doesn't mean it's an indie. So, yeah, but that's a real problem. And eBay has one kind of pricing,
Right, I would,
First Dibs has another kind, and you go somewhere in the middle, and that's usually, we're sort of agreeing to appraisal, but that's usually a better value for what you're looking at.
Yeah. okay,
We get tons of it. And yes, I have subscriptions.
yeah, I would imagine.
Which-
you would.
It's sort of a,
Yeah,
for friends.
right.
Actually, I tend to give my subscription IDs out to people that work with me,
Yeah.
so they can look it up.
Right.
And it balances, what I spent buying all these books and magazines
Yeah.
is more than outweighed by what I pay for subscriptions. This was the god of painting. Look up, it's called Benezets. It's a,
Okay.
there's 10 of them,
Okay.
and it unfortunately only goes to 1948, but it has everything you could possibly dream of before that.
Wow.
Every sale that was in, they're invaluable. I still use it.
Okay.
It's better
Yeah.
information than you can get. It's also in French. So,
All right.
but yeah, and silver was the same for years. You had to buy silver information, and I have book after book. I have a highly sought after notebook that somebody made for me that has every silver pattern that's ever been. But you have to flip through the pages.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Things.
It is hard, and you just have to be aware that what you're looking at may not be exactly what you have.
Yeah.
So that's the auction world. It was, it's great fun. I've always said I'd stop if I stopped having fun doing it. And when I had kids doing it, it was more fun because they were just wonderful. My girls started when they could barely see over a table. And then when they got into high school and late elementary school, we started bringing their friends in. So it made it friendlier. Oddly enough, teenage boys were horrible. They would get like this and they were incredibly self-conscious. And they just move all day. But my daughter's friends were having a blast. And they knew that they were allowed to talk back and make fun of me and question my truths. So it's fun. And that's kind of, any more questions about auctions? The other only big change I ever made in the auction business was I used to do them at Northeast Harbor when I started. And it was a great, Neighborhood House is a wonderful space and it was great to do it. And over time, partly my fault because I was on the board, Neighborhood House got busier and busier. So the time frame started shrinking down to when I could get in there. And then at the end of the time, I had to be in Thursday night, I could put it on the stage. And Friday morning, I had to lay it all out. Sell it Saturday, I'd be out of there Sunday before the Quakers got there. And they did not like noise in there. Eventually, I realized that I keep it all at North Bay anyways. It's a 20,000 square foot room, technically. And the dealers that aren't in Northeast Harbor would never go in there anyways to buy because they thought it would be too pricey. So our numbers went up as soon as once they found me. Once I stopped being in what they all considered the she high-end bracket. We had last weekend we had 80 bid cars out, so there were probably 120 or 130 people in the room. They don't all stay. You know, guys want the good stuff and then they want to go home. So technically, you're supposed to stagger it and make them stay through some of the less than good stuff. But it worked really well. All right, when I do appraisals, I started out doing appraisals, well, pretty much right after I started. And originally I joined what's called the American Society of Appraisers, which is, again, the Tony part business guys at that model and the ones that do the most lobbying for appraisers and are actually trying to get the government to make them the only legally allowed government appraisal service. So I went to a couple of their things and they do interesting things and they teach courses which you're required to take to continue your education, and they're expensive. It's a couple $1,000s to go to Kansas City for a weekend, and then you're required to keep your thing going. And eventually I realized you go to these events and they want you to learn, so they have specialists come in. But it's a specialist who's telling me stuff that I see every day at auctions, you know, like what Kimberly is. And whether some of the important watch guys are really good, they know more than I do, and the jewelers are. But a lot of it is stuff that we already know.
Yeah.
And so I gave them up and I joined what's called the Appraisers Guild, Certified Appraisers Guild of America, which is basically I went for one weekend. They taught the format for writing an appraisal, which is very particular, which every appraiser should use and has to use if you ever get taken to court. And they keep up to date with that. And that's pretty much it. And then you can, again, nowadays online, you can go and get all the appraisal standards you want from the government for free. And they teach you when to change your form and what to say and what wording has to be in there to make it legal. And appraising was the same thing when I started. You needed books. There's endless books. And it could take a week. I've heard of library guys that do libraries. They can spend a month doing somebody's library. Because they had to go look everything up and then they had to go back to their office and look through their books to find out what it was. That's gotten much faster. And I think probably more concise. They started asking, well, not asking, they started telling the appraisers that you couldn't just write down abstract painting and the price, because it could be a Picasso or it could be your Aunt Judy. And we have to be more exact about what we're describing, and descriptions have to be pretty clear. And pictures. Again, that's a pretty new technology for the world, but in the old days, appraisers would write a paragraph about each piece. You know, fully clean, figured mahogany, 2x2, 2/2 chest with brass escutcheons in the form of American eagles with bun feet and quarter columns, and they would write all that down. And they're pretty cool. And it's fun to know how to do it. It can be less lengthy these days. So, all right. Appraisal, yeah.
Does it look like, does everyone already have their things up there that they're asking?
Everybody that brought something, unless you have something in here.
Well,
Okay.
we did, and we didn't bring it up yet, it's
Okay.
textile, so.
Okay, I'll get to it. No
Okay,
rush.
all right.
The appraisal end of it, when you do these, is not a guaranteed appraisal, because I can't go back and look that stuff up, but it's also one of the biggest rackets in the world. You've all watched Antiques Roadshow,
Oh,
right?
yes.
There's nothing better than to sit somewhere, and which is what the twins started doing this anyways. Everybody brings your stuff to you. And they look really, really smart. But the truth is they've done their research before the articles ever get out there.
Yeah.
And they, I will demonstrate in a minute.
Well, I was gonna ask you, people tend to do one subject? I mean, do you have one
No,
specific
I
that
do
you
not.
enjoy more?
I love silver.
Silk?
Silver.
I brought silver.
Yeah, I should have brought you.
I have
some.
just always. I don't have any of my own and I don't use it, but it's fun to hunt it down.
If you want some, I've got plenty.
I'll bring you some next time.
Alright, it's just fun, and I really like, art is fun because it's always different. Furniture. The appraisal end of furniture, I tend to see better stuff. So I get to see stuff that I've trained on in Washington again, and it's nice. There was one man up here who I appraised for, who bought all of his furniture from Albert Sack in New York in the 1980s. And this was all stuff that I had seen in catalogs over the years. But the sad news is that none of that stuff was worth a quarter of what he paid for it in 1980. Period colonial tables, tall clocks. We used to have $50,000 tall clocks. They're worth 5 maybe now on a good day. I do have a tall clock story though. I worked at Guy Bush's and he was in and out of the office schmoozing people. And I was in the office all the time. And one day there was this and he was in the back room this day. There's a half on the window, and this little short guy with a scraggly beard. And then he came in, another guy with him, and they both looked like bums off the street. And we walked around for a while, and the guy looked up and went, the office, okay. And we walked around and we looked at this small clock and talked about it for a while, and then they walked out, and when the guy came out, said, you know, that's Dustin Hoffman. And he and Elkovich were doing, he was Dustin Hoffman. They were doing Death of a Salesman at the Kennedy Center.
That's great.
And it was him and Malkovich. And they were very nice. And then the next day he came back again. He's tapping on the window and guy came bombing out of the office. Mr. Hoffman, how nice to see you. He didn't buy the clock.
He didn't buy it.
So that's that. That's a big appraisal story. I don't have many great auction stories. The auctions are pretty continually a lot of the same thing. There's highs and lows. There's the William Henry Johnson painting. The best auction I ever had, oddly enough, was right after I started, before the internet. And I advertised it in the B because it was good stuff. There was a house in COA campus, the Ryle House it was called. And they had a like tenancy right in this big old stone building in the middle of campus. But they're only there in the summer. It was built in the 1880s, the family owned it forever. And every winter they locked everything up. And the college got to use it. And they finally died, and somebody called me in, and it was just this heavenly treasure trove of stuff. Period English furniture, the china was wonderful, the clocks were great, and it all had to be moved. Which I did, and we got over to a neighborhood house, and this huge crowd appeared, and I had no idea who they were. They were strangers, they weren't the local guys who were all kind of drooling. But they had shopping lists that they wired over from England of what they could buy and how much they could spend, and they just went right at it all night long, and we had a wonderful time. But and that was with nothing but a print advertisement. Which fun. It makes a difference. I still send postcards to people. We send out 600 or 700 postcards every month. And all the other local guys sort of laugh at me. But I can't think of any time we haven't paid for the cost of the postcards. Because there are people that don't look at the internet and don't have computers, and they forget. And these guys all pin them up on their refrigerators and remember to come to the auctions. Or they're in Virginia and they see it and they call up. So.
Jerry, if you're doing an estate, say,
Yeah.
how much goes to the estate and what percentage do you get of the auction?
I take 20%. Always have.
Okay, that I just have no idea.
Yep. It's a complete range for what people take. Sotheby's and the big boys have a sort of sliding scale depending on how much they're getting. But they're low end, you know, if it's under a couple $100,000, they're taking 40–50%. And they charge you for advertising. Those big, I don't know if you've ever seen them, they turn out beautiful brochures, but you pay for that.
Yeah.
They're also very collectible, the catalogs, but, and then the standard, there's a thing called a buyer's premium. Everybody went along for years and they were just charging the consignor more and more and more. And somebody thought up the idea of adding a 10% to the buyer to pay. So if you pay $100, you pay 110 at the desk. And that has gone sliding up for a lot of people, 15–20% buyer's premium. I have always stayed at 10. Guys bidding or dealers have it in their head that they're gonna sell like this for $200. So they know they're gonna pay $220, so they bid $180. And I don't see any reason to change. The way I'm set up anyways is I have almost no expenses. It's me, the warehouse, storage, and the guys that work for me. I don't have staff. I don't have a building. And I don't really want one. It's it would be nice to have a sort of a fixed location that was Jerry Miller and Company, but on a slow year, the overhead kills you. And when you get ready to retire, it's not of any value. They're buying your name. Do you ever know Jimmy Julia or of him? He was an auctioneer down in Central Maine. Great guy, did wonderful sales. He sold $1 million auctions. And he was a firearms specialist, and he had the #1 firearms. It's a strange world, guns, but he had the biggest ones in the country. He got tired, he sold the business. The guys who bought it took the gun part out of it and closed the rest of it down. And it was just gone. And his staff was gone. One of my best friends in the auction world moved there the year I moved there. Both of us from Western Mass, from the same auctioneer. And when Jimmy sold out, it was done. Yeah. So, you want me to praise your stuff? Do you have any other questions about my strange world I live in?
Gary, I have a question. You hinted at it before when you talked about the value plummeting of some things that were in the
Yes.
80s. How much of a change do you see in the business? I mean, we had to like downsize my mother's house.
It's
And she's in
been,
her 90s and nobody wants cut glass and nobody wants
No.
tacky china.
it's been a major, well, there's two things going on. That stuff has all lost its value. When I started, Noritake, Heisey glass, cut glass, were all big sellers. But the people that were collecting that were people that remembered it from when they were young, and they are dead. And the people that are collecting stuff now remember the first time they saw the Beatles. And that's what they're collecting. Mid-century Danish modern furniture is going through the roof. And anything Asian, but regular oak, mahogany, walnut furniture, even pretty good stuff is not bringing anything. If you have a real pure piece of period furniture, whatever period it's from, whether it's Chippendale or Victorian arts and crafts, they'll all do well. But anything that's not top of the line won't. And it's affected this. And again, the antiques world is aging. The guys, there are no kids coming into this business. I have probably 5 people under 50 that come to my auctions regularly, of dealers. And they're buying 70s albums, Danish modern furniture, and funky weird stuff. Because they can sell it. It's quirky, odd stuff. But you used to be able to sell train sets, because everybody had them when they were a kid, those people don't now. You can sell Nintendos, not for much yet, but it'll come, and
Game Boys.
all that stuff. But this, it's not the same, it's not a material. And as it gets more and more online and more it's something you play on the screen, there's less and less stuff around that people want. Pictures, historic pictures, they don't even do all that well anymore. Billy the Kid, yeah, but just regular pictures of the 20s and 30s and even slightly known people, no interest. You can see it all. It's not dying, it's just sort of in a hiatus. And I think the 50s were probably like that, in the 60s. I know they sold off the last of the old Bar Harbor houses in the 60s and 70s, and they did not do very well, even then. It was all, 1880s furniture, but it just didn't have a market, and some of those things went away for nothing. But then it's always like this. It's not a guaranteed life. And you end up selling it anyways, because when I do an auction, I usually have everything in the house. Not as much as I used to, but so the good stuff, the dealers come for, and then there's the middle range dealers who come for chairs like this, oak cabinets, stuff they can put in their shops. And then there's the low end dealers who are yard selling stuff, basically, or putting it in the book barn. And then there's what I call retail. They come for the last half hour of the auction, which is where you can buy a KitchenAid mixer for $25 or redo your dining room. That's been consistent. When I started, everybody I knew, we were all 30 and we were buying houses and had kids, and they came all the time to buy stuff. Now they want me to take it back, which but there is another generation of people that are still doing that. Not as many, because as we know, nobody can afford to live on the island. I just found out that you can advertise auctions on Bar Harbor, Barter, and Swamp.
Yeah.
I never even thought about it till like 2 months ago. And nobody else, not many people advertise auctions on there, but a lot of people came to get the things they need: sofas, kitchen tables, and coffee pots, and lamps.
It's the best.
Yes, it makes it interesting, because there's a range of people. When you have an all dealer night, it's really not that much fun, because they don't smile, a lot of them. But they do, because I make them, but
Right.
but they get serious, and they're not there to have a good time, they're there to buy. And they're only there to buy if they can make a decent profit. And they get grumpy if they fight. Some guys just hate each other. They're perfectly good the rest of the time, but my silver buyers just beat each other up, and they're not going to stop. It's great for me,
Right.
but they will run each other up just to screw the other guy over. And it happens more often than you think with the dealers. They just will not let go, and it's great. But it's also sad, because most of the time they're pretty friendly until they get in there. I had a guy when I was at Neighbor House who was probably my best buyer. He would come spend $10,000, $20,000, but he wouldn't stop, and everybody knew it. So with him, I couldn't go down to $1, because I knew that no one would bid against. They literally would not bid against him, even just to push him up into fair price range. So with him, I'd go down a ways and I'd look at him, and that's when he could start. And if the guys really wanted something, or they were really just sort of mad that he was getting away with stuff, they would run him up a little bit. But not a lot. It was very strange. And then he died. So that wasn't because of the auctions.
So if you're selling silver, are you better off selling it for the antique value or for the weight?
It's a mix, depends what it is. There are a bunch of guys that buy silver only to sell it for its value. And I'm not really a big fan of theirs.
Only for its value, is its weight?
Weight,
or is it
just the weight, they'll bring
Okay.
a scale in, the
Yeah.
gold guys do the same thing. They come in with their scale, they weigh it, and they bid exactly 70% of what its value is. There are guys, there's still quite a few of them that buy it for what it is. And they will not melt. Kirk and Sons Baltimore Ray Crusades for.
What is this new little place just opened up in Bar Harbor?
I don't know that.
Going and
Oh, I know of them, I haven't been in. I'm really bad about going into places.
every time I've been by, there's just a sign that says back in 5 minutes.
Yeah, I know one person that had a good experience with them.
Mhm.
I know one person that had a good experience with them.
Okay,
I don't know anything about them. Everybody in the industry
is they never seem to be.
hates gold guys. Gold guys and run guys.
I was just curious to go and take a look.
Yeah, I haven't been.
That old coins.
Yeah. I personally, obviously, think the coins do better if there's more than one person bidding on your coin when they see it. If you go into a dealer, which is true of anything you're selling.
Yeah.
They're gonna give you a price and that's it. You don't get the guy that wants it just as much there as well.
Oh, true.
If they're good and they're fair, then yeah, if they're honest about it. Jewelry guys, a lot of them are pretty honest because they have to be. And when they offer you a price, they're usually, they're gonna make money, but they're not too bad on it because they want good stuff.
Just curious about.
Rug guys are the ones everybody hates. I don't know why. But they just go nuts if the rug guys show up. They're all from away. I had a good time. They're quite often phone bidders these days. We had one the other day. Perfectly fine. Everybody was mad that there was a rug dealer on the phone, but that was their loss, and he's happy. All right. Can't think of anything else exciting to tell you. One of the other one. This watch, I bought it at an auction that I had. When I do that, when I bid at auctions of my own, I put a price in before I start. And that's what my price is. I don't start bidding against you. The guys who work for me do because they're dealers. But do you remember Echo Vista, the ice cream store? This was Franz Carbone's watch that I bought when we sold the contents of Echo Vista. And that's why I like it. He also had in the upstairs of Echo Vista was a grand piano. Not a concert grand, a small one, the baby piano. But it was a big piano. And it was underneath was this written information that used to belong to Paul Wittgenstein, who was, do you know who he was?
Yeah.
One-handed pianist, Austrian, brother of Ludwig Wittgenstein, the mathematical philosopher, who I'm sure you call that. I have not. But I don't know how it got into this guy's house. I mean, it was an upstairs apartment. But there it was. Provenance provided that it had made its way from Austria to Echo Vista ice cream store.
I know.
You find that's what makes it fun. And drawers of stuff. People put things in their drawers and forget about them. And it's where their history ends up. Their furniture isn't really their history, but the letters are good. I don't usually sell people's personal letters. But they're pretty entertaining. And I had one, we'll do two more, then I'll do appraisal. Where was that? I had a bunch of letters from the people that used to live on the farm at Jordan Pond before Jordan Pond House was there. And he was a Civil War vet, and he used to go to Civil War encampments and reenactment or reunions. And in his trunk were all these letters from guys who've been at the wives of guys who've been at the encampments, begging him not to bring his daughter anymore because she was seducing all the men. And there were about 30 or 40 of them. I don't remember her name. But it's kind of entertaining. Okay, all right. Appraising. What you do when you appraise is what everyone else does, is that nowadays you look online. And when you're hired to do a whole house appraisal, you pretty much go through everything in the house, write it down, write a description. Then I go home and I look it all up because I don't know everything and nobody can. If I get a bunch of jewelry, I go to a jeweler and have him appraise it. Art that maybe something that I've never seen that I don't know anything about, we get somebody else to help out. And Asian art, because I don't know Asian art and nobody does. Not really. I mean, there's so much of it out there that you need to ask specific questions from specific people to get the right answer. And then you just write it all down in the format and send it off. All right, what do we got here? I will start with this because I looked this up. And this is how if you memorize it, you look really smart. This is a sterling little jewelry box, compo box of some sort from Birmingham, England. It has its stamps. I have a glass of it. Do you know what it is? Have you looked
I
at it?
don't.
Okay.
That's why I brought it.
Please said how smart.
I'm very pleased to know even that.
I actually used the book, which I haven't used in years. All English silver has a mark on it, several marks. It has a town mark, a year mark, and usually with the king or queen, whoever was in power. So you can pretty easily cut it in half between Victoria and the Georges. This is later. It's from Birmingham, England, and it was made by a firm called Signer and Beddoes, who were in business from 1896 to 1949. And there's a G on here, and that mark is their 1920, is the Birmingham 1926 mark. So that's exactly what it is.
Very good.
Yeah. It's ours.
It was a gift to me from a woman that I babysat for.
It's a nice piece. They did some nice, I looked them up. You obviously don't know every jeweler that has ever been around, but this was a little baker. When I went and checked online, they came right up. And you can take pictures and Google things just by the picture, but
just a picture of the mark on the bottom and then.
Yeah. They were very well known. That's the wrong, this is the old silver.
Oh, that's the other.
Yeah.
Old silver. Okay.
Well, that is called that.
Cool.
Yeah. And those are just other books I used over time. Examples of what I spent my time doing. Do you guys remember Lee Friedman? Used to be a jeweler Lee Friedman. He had a store over here on the side of the street. He was an old style antique dealer. And he kept meticulous notes of everything he owned. And he also had the only one I've ever seen, a complete collection of Halley magazine, which is the Oriental Jug Bible. Which I ended up buying from him because he wasn't using it anymore. And I have hundreds of these. And in the day, you would sit there and you'd look through, you get a rug. This also has stories down. And you'd look through until you found a matching rug. And then you'd make sure that you had the right one and you'd find more about it, and then you'd look up prices of rugs over time. But if you ever run into these, they're fast, if you like rugs, they're fascinating. The descriptions and histories of it are really cool.
We actually purchased, like our first or second book from him for $15. And he kept telling us over and over again, it's not Oriental, it's not Oriental.
He was an old style antique dealer, wheeler dealer, door knocker. But he knew more stuff than most guys I've ever met. And he kept records of it all. I ended up with half of them because who could resist? Him and Raymond Stroud. You remember, you guys all know Raymond? He was the other smartest guy I've ever met in this business. He knew amazing amounts of stuff. He was willing to share it, which some guys aren't. I mean, it was just, he was what I taught my daughters, never to judge a book by its cover. Choked up because they missing.
Yeah.
All right. Then, after that, hours and hours looking that up, I looked this up. And I had the information I needed already. Henry Kellum Hancock, who made the wood guards through the 1800s. It turns out Henry Kellum Hancock was a very well-known Massachusetts furniture maker, but he was even better known for his selling of brass furniture parts. And the Met has a whole display of his things, not out in public, but it's on there. And so does the Winterthur Museum down in Delaware. They have displays of his brass pieces that he didn't make them, he sold them. He brought them from Europe, but he had a whole warehouse full of all the stuff I still collect when I find it loose because I'm gonna need it someday. Brass of every kind. And so that's where it came from. And I could find almost no pictures of his furniture.
I know.
Yeah.
I own some, and my cousins own some, and some we've donated to the Winterthur, and they are
And they
actually,
don't put pictures up.
they're interested in this one.
Good. Winterthur wouldn't show pictures of his stuff that they have.
No.
Unless you get in on it. So anyways, it's probably 1850s. That's when he ended. It's later, it's not an earlier piece. And this is the right era for that. This is almost, it's the weird era, the 1840s, 1850s. It's almost Biedermeier-like, which is a German 1830s, 1840s furniture style. And I bet he saw some of it and knew about it. I don't know what the things you donated look like, but this is
fancier than the other things that I have.
It's an unusual shape. It's early. Biedermeier was a German style that had very clean lines, the incurved feet like that. It was usually in birch, but that's pretty much what it is.
It is liftable.
Yeah. I'm not sure that it's worth $10,000, but a couple.
Drops it.
The bottom you tighten, yes.
I would think a couple thousand.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about the little box? The silver?
Oh, probably not as much as that. 200-300.
Okay.
The weight guys won't pay much for it because it doesn't weigh much.
Right.
But it's spiffy.
Yeah.
And
I love it.
silver always sells. But it doesn't bring thousands of dollars. There's a company called Samuel Kirk or S. Kirk and Sons from Baltimore that made what everybody calls Baltimore rose or repousse. It's very gaudy floral rose pattern silver. They go through the roof. And Tiffany, because he's Tiffany, and whoever made it, George Jensen, who was a Swede that came here. His things from before he got to New York are much better than his things after. But it all does well, and if it has his name on it, you're guaranteed that they'll go nuts. Couple other guys, but not that many. They're getting into, again, mid-century modern silver was completely different. It started to look, it's very streamlined. And that's starting to climb because it's what everybody ate their Christmas dinners off. And it's very modern and sleek. And the older guys are backing off a little, but the traditional famous old guys are still doing fine.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Then, what else did I look at? Your table. I'm not as thrilled with your table. It's not terribly old.
Okay, I have no idea. And
It's kind of it's a reproduction of what they call English revival furniture.
okay.
With the little cupids, and they're actually the gods of wind.
Okay.
And you see it in big, heavily carved German furniture and English furniture, usually dark walnut.
Okay.
And if you look up Renaissance revival, it'll come up, something like it.
Well, it sat out on my porch, not fully exposed, and so the wind brought pollen. That's why it looks even worse. So it's got pollen all over it too. So the wind brought the pollen to it. Okay, so it's
Probably 1930s, 1940s.
okay.
Because this is my favorite part. It's all held together with these glue blocks, which they didn't make in those days.
Yeah.
And the tray probably not. This is an insert of some sort.
Oh, good.
But it's that's what it is. It's a machine made. It could be Asian because they imported this stuff by the gazillions. But it's a $100, $150.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
That's really good to know.
Not $10 million.
Because I have actually outgrown it, and I don't know if my mother left Massachusetts for California when she was 16 and it went with her, or if she got it there, but it came back in my load of stuff in 10 years ago with
When
me.
did she leave?
She left Massachusetts in 1942.
I would almost guess that it
Came
bought from in California.
in California, do you
Yeah.
think? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Yeah. And then we have.
So you think it's around the 40s?
Yeah.
And it was
It's
reproduction.
It's a reproduction. It's kind of English revival.
Okay, thank you.
But it's also kind of what we call in the trade a bastardized piece.
Nice.
They were whoever made it.
Made it quickly.
No, just put too much on it.
Okay.
There's more than it needed to be any particular style.
Okay. That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, these are the scallop shell fleur-de-lis and the inlay and.
Oh, that's good, because the movers chipped it too, and.
Oh, then you should have sued.
Yeah, I know, I should have really, so no, that's great, that's really good to know, I can let it go a lot more easily now.
Yeah.
Tell them it was insured for 100.
Right, yeah, no, that's great, it has character, I like it. Okay, thank you.
Now, these, you brought in, and you know more about it than I do.
It's good that I snuck them in on you.
They're from the 1904, Chicago, right?
St. Louis.
St. Louis Fair, World's Fair. And they were part, I have no pictures, and I'm taking this on coded knowledge.
Chinese
The Chinese pavilion was set up at the exhibition.
Right.
And there was a whole room. And
Well, the whole thing.
The
done
pavilion.
with.
You know how big it was?
It's quite large. It was dismantled after the fair. A lot of the
Wait, I get to
buildings.
tell them that part. I get to tell them.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It was dismantled after the fair and stored in the basement of Washington University for many years, where unfortunately, some of it was water damaged.
There was a flood, yes,
There, sounded like I knew this.
but it was saved
It was.
by my
And
father.
you have like hundreds of these or?
There were hundreds of them, yes,
Yeah.
and it was distributed throughout the family.
These are something that any appraiser in his right mind would run screaming from.
That what?
It would run screaming from, because there's no real way I mean, we have sales records because you've sold them. And you got $400.
I think Teddy got 400 or 500 for one of the panels.
Yeah. Which I suspect is unusual. But if that's the only sales record you have, that's, if I was appraising it for you for an insurance appraisal, that's what you'd appraise it for.
Yeah.
Because that's what they sold for, and that's what each one piece should be worth. In my mind.
It was quite a bit larger panel.
If I sold these, like I told you, I think I'd get $100, $200 a piece.
Yeah.
Because they're agent. Because if I did that, I would have pictures of the pavilion that I'd run off and prove where it came from. And then I would get a letter written saying its history and where it's at in the basement of Washington University to prove it. And somewhere, there's somebody that collects St. Louis fair.
So there are a lot of people who do, and I think possibly if I looked into it, I might be able to find out more about the sales from Washington.
Yep, because you need a picture of the whole room to sell it really well, to market it really well.
Yeah.
Anywhere but piece by piece, yeah.
But like I said, it was designed after the Kingdom of China or whatever it was, the Emperor of China's
bedroom.
bedroom.
Yeah. See if you could find a picture of that, it would make the value triple.
Oh, yeah, you can find pictures online.
Yeah, but you'd have to be able to prove that.
Yeah.
These are we'd accept that the panels are the panels you see, but you'd have to have a pretty good picture so they could see what the panels really look like.
Because it was completely dismantled and.
Yeah, and then put together. Yeah.
And there were dragon heads and all kinds of fabulous stuff
must have been
that
cool.
George bought, so.
And that's what sells something like this. Any World's Fair stuff.
Yeah.
I grew up in Buffalo and they had the exhibition there and the whole city of Buffalo was rebuilt for it. Yeah. I grew up on what's called Chapin Parkway, and then there was Lincoln Parkway and Delaware Park, and everything that way from it, I forget which direction that is, was where the fair was. And then they have two of the buildings still left over from the fair. The rest of it was taken down. But all those streets and the Broadways and everything they laid out are still there. And it was the garden designer. Olmsted did all of it. He did Delaware Park. And redesigned pretty much the whole area in that end of town for the fair.
Well, in St. Louis, we have the same thing, Forest Park.
Yeah.
And several of the buildings, like the Art Museum and the Jewel Box and the St. Louis Zoo.
Yeah.
Were all part of the World's Fair.
Yeah.
But most of the buildings were built from stuff called staff.
Yeah.
Which was basically dissolved after
Yeah.
the fair was taken down.
There's a
But this
paper mache
pavilion
building.
was meant to be dismantled.
It's probably how they got it there too.
Yeah.
There's a paper mache building in San Francisco that was there for their thing.
Exactly.
It was supposed to last 10 years. It's still there. It's great.
Yeah.
It's just,
They maintained it somehow, yeah.
yeah.
But I
it
looked, in
was,
St. Louis growing up and going to Forest Park and seeing all the great stuff that was from the fair. There's a woman who is researched that I found online, who lives in St. Louis. And spent her whole life researching the World's Fair. And I'm gonna try and contact her to see if she can give me more information about the pavilion.
that would be good.
And that way I can get more.
Yeah, because if you ever sell any more of them online, you should have the picture and the.
And
proof.
all my,
Yeah.
you know, Teddy's siblings and whatnot all have bits and
pieces.
pieces of this.
As I told you, you should try and find the amber room. That would
The what?
The amber room would be a could find two.
Well, that's the Russian one. That
Yeah.
has nothing to do with this.
No, but it's another disassembled room that people are still looking for. All right, these are kind of cool.
Yeah.
There's two of them, they're not in great shape. They are papers certifying that the two black sailors were American citizens and freedmen. So that they couldn't be hauled off. Especially if they went to the South on a ship.
Florida.
They could haul them right off. And so these were papers that proved that they were freedmen and were allowed to be left alone. I don't know how effective they ever were. Do you?
I don't, this came totally out of the blue, going through old boxes. I just know Captain Lord sailed to Canton.
Yeah.
He went quite a lot of long distances. And
They, I suspect the most they needed them for were for American ships, so Southerners. And the British used to board ships all the time.
But I know when we first opened them up and I'm going, oh gosh, and then I found out they were free men and guaranteed protection of the United States Constitution by those papers.
The British were always hauling people off ships. This first one's from 1811, and they were still just boarding ships and taking guys off and claiming they weren't protected. They're great. They're probably worth a few $100s each.
We won't be looking to sell them.
Right,
They'll go to a museum.
Yeah, they should. And they've been, I don't know if they've been burned or just aged, but you should put them in something that will
Like I said, they've been living in
keep
this.
them up, get them out of the box and put them somewhere safer. They're very cool. I sold many years ago. You can pick one up here.
You sure?
Yep.
I need to trust Kate with my grandson, so I'll trust her.
All right. I had a stamp sale, probably 10 or 15 years ago now at neighborhood house. Somebody brought me 2 totes full of old stamps, and I knew nothing about stamps. So I spent 2 weeks looking them up and sorting them and picking them out and trying to figure out what they were and identifying them. And in the stamp sale were a whole bunch of slave papers, slave-related sales, slave sales, slave manumission papers, and a couple other Southern documents that just happened to be signed by Madison or something. So I went, it's a long story. I set this auction up. I advertised it on Arts and Antiques Weekly and everywhere else. And I set the room up, which was the easiest setup I ever did because it was just stamps. 3 guys showed up. And then a 4th guy showed up. And I thought I was doomed. They didn't talk all day. They just walked around with their magnifying glasses and looked at everything. And then we started. And I started my usual 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, like you do up here. And they started laughing at me. They said, can we go by hundreds?
No.
And I said, sure. So we banged through that. And there was a guy on the phone and he said, the other 3 guys, one of them's a little fat guy, right? The other one's got a big bushy beard. The 3rd one's a big skinny guy, right? Yeah, I said, damn, I knew I should have come. Anyway, at the end of the sale, they all told me, well, we knew you had great stuff, but we knew you didn't know anything about what you had. And they told me they go to Sotheby's and all the big places because they pay no attention to stamps. And they could make $250,000. They were pissed because I laid them out so thinly that they couldn't gang them up and do it. But anyway, Ashley Bryant, the artist from Granbury, bought all of the slave paper because he didn't want it to go commercial. And he later wrote a book using the names of the people on that paper that just came out last year or 2 years ago. But he bought all of it and just said it's not going to New York to get sold again. And the stamp guys weren't bidding on it. So yeah, he was the one interested. They weren't, that's not what they wanted.
Someone suggested getting in touch with the Smithsonian Museum of African American Culture and History.
Yeah.
See if they'd be interested.
Yeah.
And for those that didn't hear, Captain John Woods had a Newburyport, and it's my husband's, I think, like sixth great grandfather, something like that.
There was a lot of hauling guys up, I forget what they call it. The British were the most notorious for it. They just would take people off ships, claim they were lying if they really were British citizens. And
Yeah, I haven't poked around to see if I can learn anything about those two men. Whether they ended up settling down in Ipswich and Newburyport area. Wow, that would be great, man. That's a story for sure.
yeah, this is good. Paper is one of my favorite things.
I got a big smile out of them when I took them out of the box.
No, I love paper.
Those are awesome.
It's and there's less and less of it around.
Of paper.
Yeah, it gets thrown out and it gets burned. I was out on Cranberry cleaning out a house one year and I got there and in the backyard was a 50-barrel drum burning, and they'd thrown out all the paper that had been in the house since they were saving me time, and they kept me something like 45 broken chairs.
I have tons of paper stuff from family.
It's
Do you still do stamps?
sometimes, but only old stamps. The reason these
It was
guys,
my grandfather's stamp book, and his father was.
are they
Charles W. Elliott.
pre-1850?
Huh?
Are they pre-1850?
Probably in there,
That's what we need. Anything before 1850, which is when they started making stamps.
and there are
And-
just tons and tons of every page filled.
And canceled envelopes.
Some are, some aren't.
Yeah, these guys were this before stamps, they just put a stamp that said Chancellorville or whatever on it. And that's what the stamp guys really like.
Remember, who was it? Strong, who used to be out in Trenton?
Yes,
He was a stamp collector. He did stamps. It
yeah,
was great fun. Looked at it.
stamps are good. It's hard to get those guys to come up. You have to write a really bad ad and play stupid and then they show up.
I'd love to have somebody look at it and knows what they're doing. 'Cause
I know what they look like, I can tell you that.
Because his dad was Charles W. Elliott, one of the founders of the park.
Yeah,
So that goes back to that.
yeah. That's kind of all I planned. If you've got any other questions.
Who's like it?
Oh, your blanket.
And the picture.
Oh, that's just something I brought to,
Oh, okay.
if I ran out of things to look at.
So I got the city yard sale
Yeah.
because it's beautiful. I've never used it because it's scratchy as all get out.
Mm-hmm.
It's handmade. The fact that it's not symmetrical, I'm thinking I did a little poking around online and I think it might be half of a Navajo chief's blanket, but that's purely a guess. Because I think this edge would have been joined up to the other side to make it symmetrical because the loom was always so wide. As a guess, but
It was sealed up originally. It could very well be, but I couldn't, without going and looking things up myself. Tell you much about it.
yeah, I can't even figure out what it's made of, why it's so scratchy.
It's wool. It's just some wool is not that smooth. Let me take a picture. I can't tell you anything without looking.
What's the story of this?
The colors are rather dull for Navajo. They usually use reds and other colors. Which makes me think it might not be. It might be South American. Which would also explain the scratchiness because
It seems more like hair than wool, but
well, I think it's.
I originally thought it was a horse blanket that was full of horsing.
No, it's just a coarse wool blanket. I actually have one in Africa that's coarse. But I will look. My guess is gonna be South American. Just because almost all the Southwest blankets were brighter. I will go look. leave your name out, see what I can find out.
Sure.
This is a fun part of my business, is getting to look stuff up.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And I actually have a book on South American blankets at home, but I think I'll probably use it. That's pretty much all I got. That's what I've done. My whole
Thank you
life.
so much.
It's a lot more fun than. It's fun for me. I have always, I have no interest in it not being entertaining.
That's great. When's your next auction? You and Norm Baker.
June 22nd. Is what I call a general sale, because I don't really know what's gonna be in it.
Where will that
Do you know where Norumbega is? Norumbega Moving and Storage? Up on, Marshall Brook Road.
Yeah. Oh,
It's,
okay.
it's the warehouse up on Marshall Brook
Okay.
Road. People swore for years that no one would ever find it, but it was after GPS, they all found it. I have cards if anybody wants one.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you.
so much.